And we made it very, very big, but we sold out, you know. And the music was dead before we even went on the theatre tour of Britain. We were feeling shit already. The Beatles music died then.
You've made so much money and you've achieved so much success so early. Does this worry you?
It's not a worry, it's just saved us wasting our lives achieving it.
Yeah, you know, our thing just happens to be very condensed and speeded.
We chose a modern form of success.
Very quick, because 1 second we were just there doing that with that much money. The next second, what people normally take a lifetime to do was just all there, suddenly just handed. We didn't have to do anything for it.
Except for work.
Not a bit.
You know, we had to work and do songs and make records and that, but it didn't feel like anything to us.
Were you astonished, you and Ringo and George, by the overwhelming reaction to you here in the States?
Yeah, we're more astonished. We sort of knew what we were doing a bit in Britain, although even that astonished us. The most amazing thing was making it in America, because we thought they'll never like what we almost thought was imitation American music, which we were trying to do.
You always said that, you know, for the Beatles, you wanted the Beatles wanted the biggest.
Yeah.
Why?
Because Elvis was the biggest. We wanted to be the biggest, you know. Doesn't everybody, you know? We wanted to, say, Paul and I wanted to be the Goffin and King of England. This was an old story, you know, because Goffin and King were writing this great stuff at that time. And then we decided, well, we're better than them, so we want to be this, you know, we want to be the world. It's just like, we want to be this, we want to be the next thing, you know, we want to be president or whatever. Goes on and on and on. But we always wanted to be bigger than Elvis, because Elvis was the thing. Whatever we say, he was it.
You've been called England's greatest export.
Everybody wants to get something or make something one way or another. And we chose a modern way of making it in the so-called relative making it, money and cars. Because obviously we didn't want to spend our lives
it's like
to get to nowhere.
If you could take a pill to just get famous and rich, a lot of people would. You know? Ours was a bit like that.
Was this what you really wanted to do at first? You wanted to get rich? Was this?
Oh yeah, you know, I mean, that's what.
You just want to make it, whatever you do. You all set out leaving school or whatever it is, and you want to make it. So you choose your field, and you make it, or you don't. People always said we were leading the 60s, you know, and changing everybody's hair and that. And we were standing up there looking different, but we were reflecting what was going on the streets in England and here too. Well, the hair thing started in England. And what we really were figureheads for what was going on. So I never really claimed, we changed something, I'm not quite sure what it was, but we represented a change rather than were the instigators of the change. If whatever we wore was already on the street, we would just see it in a shop, buy it, or have it remade and go on stage with it. Mm-hmm. The haircuts just sort of happened almost. But we were just sort of part of the scene, but we were the figureheads, you know. We're the masthead on the boat. The boat was going on it of its own accord. Mm-hmm. And we were just that thing stuck on the front.
And there was so much screaming and so much carrying on. And did that bother you at all when you were doing those concerts? That people couldn't hear your music, that all they heard was themselves screaming?
It got a little boring. I mean, it was great when it first happened. When you'd come on, there'd just be nothing but wah, you know. But then we just became like lip-syncing, you know, miming. And sometimes things would break down and nobody'd know. And so it wasn't doing the music any good, you know.
When you guys were in the dressing rooms after these concerts, or when you were in the dressing room after the Ed Sullivan Show, where, my heavens, young people were just almost flinging themselves on stage, didn't you ever wonder, are these people crazy? Are we that good? Can we really produce this kind of reaction in people?
But I always said that we were like in the eye of the hurricane. So we were just in this little goldfish bowl in the middle, and one didn't really have time to think what was going on. It was just going on so fast. You just had to keep your eye on the road. That was about all you could do. Looking back at it, it's astonishing that I was part of it. I was one of those things that happened, like an Al Jolson or something. You know, it's already looking like history. It is, it's 10 years ago. nearly. And it's a strange feeling to look back on it. So, I was right in that. It was like being in the eye of a hurricane, and so there was never a time when you thought, what's going on? And that was about as deep as it got. What is happening, or what? You know, you'd suddenly wake up in the middle of a concert or a happening, and think, what? How did I get here? You know. The last thing I remember was playing music in a club, and the next minute this. But we never thought about it too much because it was an ongoing thing. It was happening to us, and it was hard to see. You know, we were just in the middle, being ushered from room to room. They say we changed the music, but we used the music that was already there. You can take half our melodies and do them in a 20 style. So it's hard to put your finger on what the change was. Maybe we were part of a movement where heroes were no longer from the upper classes, especially in Britain. You couldn't even get in a British movie unless you'd been to Oxford or something. I mean, it was ridiculous. I was saying to somebody the other day, there's only 2 artists I've ever worked with for more than one night stand, as it were. That's Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono. I think that's a pretty damn good choice. Because in the history of the Beatles, Paul met me the first day I did Bebopaloola live on stage. Okay? And a mutual friend brought him to see my group called the Quarrymen. And we met and we talked after the show. And I saw he had talent, and he was playing guitar backstage and doing 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran. And I turned around to him right then on first meeting and said, "Do you want to join the group?" And he said, And I think he said yes the next day, as I recall it. Now, George came through Paul, and Ringo came through George, although, of course, I had a say in where they came from, but the person I actually picked as my partner, who I recognized had talent and I could get on with, was Paul.
And I'm just wondering how unified any group can be. And I'm not singling out the group that you belong to, the Beatles, but how unified can any group be when the audience has certain favorites? Maybe they like Paul more than they like John or something like that. And I wonder, I got right to it, didn't I? Yeah. I just wondered if it's awfully difficult to be friends, and do you really care about whether or not you're friends when you are a group such as the Beatles, or whether you're the Rolling Stones or whoever?
We didn't break up because we weren't friends. We just broke up out of sheer boredom, you know. And boredom creates tension.
How can you get bored doing what you did?
Because it was going on, it was not going anywhere, you know. We'd stop touring, and we'd just sort of say, "Time to make an album," you know, go in the studio, and the same 4 of us would be looking at each other and playing the same licks. We were just a band who made it very, very big, that's all. You know, and sometimes our best work was never recorded, you know, because we were performers in spite of what Mick says about us. In Liverpool, Hamburg, and around the dance halls, you know, and what we generated was fantastic. Well, we played straight rock. And there was nobody to touch us in Britain, you know. It was mainly fear, even though I wanted the Beatles thing to end. I felt as though I couldn't breathe if it went on any longer. And also it was sort of dying, you know.
Do you think it was smothering you individually?
Yeah, it was that, and we were no longer enjoying it. And all through it, we really did enjoy it. There were lots of messing and times we hated it, but basically we did it because we liked it. The rewards were as a sort of bonus. We wanted to be musicians, we liked working together. It got boring, you know, and we got over all the actual fighting, the real nitty-gritty, dirty, you know, stuff, which had nothing to do with how popular we were. The same popularity, meaning Paul was always more popular than the rest of us, was going down in the dance halls in Liverpool, so it didn't come as any big surprise, you know. I mean, the kids saw him, the girls would go, ooh, you know, right away, so we knew where the score was there. But it was a group, it was the music that was interesting, that was important, not who was, you know, as long as we were, you know, going forward and going somewhere, it didn't matter.
The success of the Beatles will probably continue for a long time, but eventually it will taper off. That's not a prediction, that's just the way things go. Now, what do you plan for the future? I realize this is your career right now, but do you have any particular specialization that you care to make, like writing for motion pictures or just continuing to write music, or what exactly?
Do you ever envision a time of just ceasing being the Beatles and going off on your own, or even working together?
We do work on our own anyway now.
You never can be anything else but the Beatles.
The Beatles, that's what we are. We're also Apple as well, see. They're like Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Brown. You've got that oath meant to be nice, you see.
The pop business is a young man's world. It seems to have an ever-increasingly young audience. Do you think that perhaps writing a book like this and writing at all perhaps might be an unconscious attempt to win recognition in the adult world? No, because I started all this writing long before I was a pop artist or even a Beatle or before I had a guitar. So it's nothing to do with that. The guitars came second. And which comes first? Well, now the guitars come first, because this is still a hobby, which it always has been.
If this turns out the way you want it, will you do other acting roles, you think, John?
Well, I don't know. I can sit back and think, oh, well, I don't need to, I don't know what I'll do. I didn't know I was going to do this, really, till I did it. I don't think too far ahead. Or plan, I mean.
Will all the guys go out and do things on their own now, do you think?
Well, if they feel like, there's something to do.
I think it's time to spread your wings, why not?
Yeah, there's lots to be done,
You got the store going for you all the time, and whatever else you want to do on the side.
Yeah, we'll just try our best at whatever we're doing.
They could be, on our own or together. We're always involved with each other, whatever we're doing.
Could you ever see a time when, in fact, you weren't working together?
I could see us working not together for a period, but we'd always get together for one reason or other. I mean, you need other people for ideas as well, but, and we all get along fine.
And you haven't really decided exactly what...
No, I'll try a few things, but I just found out a bit more about films doing that.
What's this? The songwriting team thing will keep going on whatever happens, will it?
Yeah, we'll probably carry on writing music forever, whatever else we're doing. Because you just can't stop. You find yourself doing it whether you want to or not.
I don't know, I could just get asked this all the time, every day, and I wish I could think of just a straight answer, like, I want to be a man who walks with his left leg in the gutter, but I can't. I wouldn't mind writing songs, I wouldn't mind just singing, to a limited audience. See, my voice might improve when I get older, I think they do, Or I wouldn't mind just writing books.
A lot of people in America still don't really understand why it all ended. A million and one rumors, conflicting stories. If you had to make one statement as to what busted up the Beatles, what ended it, what would you say?
Because we all had basically had enough, and nobody knew how to say it. I mean, we mightn't even have been aware that we'd had enough ourselves. That's why I say maybe we should have finished it a bit sooner.
But all of a sudden, there just wasn't any further progress. It was the same old over and over again.
It just got like a marriage that doesn't work or something.
And then we all started to get more interested in our own music and go in different ways. I mean, if you hear our separate albums, they're similar, but our personalities have sort of developed, and they were a bit stifled in the Beatles, I think. And between us now, we sell 10 times more records than the Beatles did. Yeah. Individually, if you add them all together, we're doing far better than we were then.
I used to think, well, like a lot of people do, well, what can I do if I don't do that? And so from 65 on, I was sort of vaguely looking for somewhere to go, but didn't have the nerve to really step out in the boat by myself, push the boat off. So I sort of hung around. And when I met and fell in love, God, this is different from anything before. This is something other. This is well, I don't know what it is, but this is fine. This is thank you. It's more than a hit record. It's more than gold. It's more than everything. It's more than. This is something indescribable.
Can you remember when you realized that it was inevitable that you would split up?
I wouldn't. No. It's like saying, did you remember falling in love? Not quite. Yeah. Just sort of happens. They're always trying to pinpoint what happened, why the Beatles split up, right? Well, the Beatles were splitting up themselves. Disintegrating is the word for it. And I think the Klein Eastman situation really pushed it over the hill.
You're not saying that you wouldn't have split but
no,
for
no.
kind of...
It's like we were going to get a divorce anyway. It was in, you know, like the marriage wasn't going too well. Nothing, you know, you can put your finger on, but the marriage was over.
John, did it leave tension in the group? Was it
The
part
tension
of
was
it?
already there. When Brian died, we got a bit lost, you know, because we needed a manager. All of us are artists, and we're nothing else, you know, so we can't manage ourselves or, you know, look after ourselves in that way. But it's a lot for four sort of big heads like the Beatles to stay together for such a long time. And in the early days, there was the thing of making it big, or, you know, breaking into America, and we had a goal together. But as soon as we made it. The edges were knocked off. You know, Brian put us in suits and all that, and we made it very, very big, but we sold out, you know. And the music was dead before we even went on the theatre tour of Britain. We were feeling shit already, because we had to reduce an hour or 2 hours playing, which we would land in one way, to 20 minutes and go on and repeat the same 20 minutes every night. The Beatles music died then as musicians. That's why we never improved, you know. As musicians, we killed ourselves then to make it. And that was the end of it. And George and I are more inclined to say that, you know. But when we reached about 28 or 29, it began to be, oh, what's the goal? You know, we've made it. And it was getting like, we were getting more talented, and George began to write lots of songs. You couldn't even make an album, you know. You're lucky to get a track on an album. That's one of the main reasons the Beatles ended, you know, because I can't speak for George, but I pretty damn well know. We got fed up of being sidemen for Paul. After Brian died, that's what began to happen to us, you know. And the camera work was set up to show Paul and not to show anybody else, and that's how I felt about it. And on top of that, the people had cut it as Paul is God and we're just lying around there, you know. And that's what I felt. I think Paul, I don't know how much of this I want to put out, I tell you. I think Paul had an impression, he has it now like a parent, that we should be thankful for what he did, you know. But he kept, for keeping the Beatles going, but when you look upon it objectively, he kept it going for his own sake, you know. But not for my sake did Paul struggle. But Paul made an attempt to carry on as if Brian hadn't died, you know, by saying, now, boys, we're going to make a record. Paul took over and supposedly led us, you know. But what is leading us when we went round in circles? We broke up then. That was the disintegration.
Do you think you got out of it at a good time, or looking back, do you think maybe you should have gotten out of it earlier, or?
I think if we'd left it any later, it was getting nearly too late, you know.
Well, they've been trying to knock us down since we began, including the British press, always saying, you know, the big joke in crowd with us was, what are you going to do when the bubble bursts? And we told them, privately, and then etc., that we'd go when we decided, not when some fickle public decided, you know. Because we're not a manufactured group, that we are what we are because we know what we're doing.
John, you don't think it had anything to do with marriage and wives, and that's...
No, because I was married from before the Beatles left Liverpool. That never made any difference. I mean, Sin didn't have a career like Yoko does, but married, Patty had a career. That never upset it. You know, I think looking back, you know, understand there'd been four guys very close together, and the women that we were with then, wives or girlfriends, had been, you know, the old-fashioned type of female that we all know and love, you know, the one that was in the kitchen all the time with the baby, and you never, you know, she never came to the sessions even. You never saw the wives, only for openings when they did their hair, you know. And suddenly we were together all the time, you know, sort of in a corner mumbling and giggling together and doing Two Virgins and Bags, and Paul, George and Ringo saying, what the hell are they doing? What's happened to him, you know? And my attention completely went off them. Now, it wasn't deliberate. It was just like, I was so involved and intrigued with what we were doing that and then we'd look around and see that we weren't being approved. But I understand how they felt, because if it had been Paul or George or Ringo that had fallen in love with somebody, got totally involved suddenly, it wasn't like, you know, George coming in and saying, I'm going to work with Eric Clapton in a band now and screw you. People still have this idea that
the Beatles were some kind of sacred thing that shouldn't step outside of its circle. And it was hard for us to work together then. We think that either people have forgotten or they've grown up by now. And we'll make a second foray into that place where she and I are together, and not some wondrous mystic prince from the rock and roll world dabbling with this strange Oriental woman.
If it is Yoko and Linda's fault for breaking up the Beatles, can they have the credit for the great music that each of us have made individually?
It's the same. You can quote Paul, you can look at it in the papers. He said many times that first he hated Yoko and then he got to like her. It's too late for me, you know. And for Yoko, you know, why should she take that kind of shit from those people? You know, they're writing about her looking miserable in Let It Be. You sit through 60 sessions with the most big-headed, uptight people on earth and see what it's fucking like and be insulted by it just because you love someone. That's, and George insulted her right to her face in Apple office at the beginning, just being straightforward. You know, that game of, well, I'm going to be up front because this is what I've heard, and Dylan and a few people said you've got a lousy name in New York, and you give off bad vibes. That's what George said to her, and we both sat through it, and I didn't hit him, I don't know why. But I was always hoping that they'd come round. I couldn't believe it, you know.
Nobody ever said anything about Paul having a spell over me when I was with him for a long time, or me having a spell over Paul. They didn't think that was abnormal, 2 guys together, or 4 guys together. In those days, why didn't anybody ever say, how come those guys don't split up? I mean, what's going on backstage? I mean, what is that, you know, Paul and John business?
Yeah.
Why, you know, how can they be together so long? We spent more time together than John and Yoko in the early days, the 4 of us sleeping in the same room, practically in the same bed, in the same truck, all right, doing everything together. Nobody said a damn thing about being under the spell. Maybe they said we were under the spell of Brian Epstein or George Martin. There's always somebody has to be doing something to you. Anyway, she didn't split the Beatles because how could one girl split the Beatles, or one woman, you know? The Beatles were drifting apart on their own, you know. But we've been together now longer than the Beatles, you know that?
That's interesting, isn't it?
People always think in terms of John and Yoko just got together and the Beatles split, and we've been together longer than the Beatles. You know, the Beatles were disintegrating slowly after Brian Epstein died. It was a slow death, and it was happening. It's evident in Let It Be, although Linda and Yoko were evident then, but they weren't when we started it, I don't think. It was evident in India, when George and I stayed there and Paul and Ringo left, and it was evident on the White Album, you know. It's just natural. It's not a great disaster. People keep talking about it as if it's the end of the earth. It's only a rock group that split up. It's nothing important. You know, you have all the old records there if you want to reminisce. You have all this great music. I think Paul is selling more records than he ever sold as a Beatle. I'm selling more than I ever sold as a Beatle, as an individual. Between the 4 of us, we're selling many more records than the Beatles ever did, obviously. It's insane. People, even the young people, refuse to accept change.
Yeah.
Did you save your money?
What we could get our hands on, yeah.
What do you mean, what you could get your hands on?
A lot of it got siphoned off before we even got near it, you know. I mean, we didn't know anything about business or anything like that, you know. And there's a lot of money. There's a lot of millionaires around this world, so. Brian just died, and that left us really in the air. We didn't know anything about the business side, not one iota about it. Well, we were in rather a predicament, having been left with contracts signed at me being the next to eldest, Ringo's the oldest, but me being 23 when we signed all those things, and the other 2 being 21 and 22. And what we got into then is still hanging us up now. That's why the ball game has been so difficult, because everything we signed in those days was signed with, we didn't know what we were signing.
And that's usually where artists slip up, is somebody waves a few dollars in front of them to sign anything. You know, we've all been through that, I suppose, or the concept of getting so many dollars or whatever.
You see, we earned millions and millions of money, but I must tell you that the Beatles got very little of it. We've all got houses, but it's usually we've managed to pay for them finally now after all these years.
Yeah.
And that really only happened since Klein came in, the so-called wolf. And there's millions earned, but we never got it, you know.
Well, who got it then, John?
Well, you know, there's lots of big companies in London with various names. You just have to check them out and their connection with the Beatles, and you see where the money's gone.
Everybody.
And in America, too, everybody connected with us is millionaires except for the Beatles.
You're not.
They used to tell Paul and I we are millionaires. We never have been. I might possibly be coming up to it shortly, you know, if we get lucky. But it's true, you know, we didn't get the money.
And you certainly aren't a millionaire. You never have been a millionaire.
No.
Not George, Ringo.
No, George and Ringo are practically penniless. Yoko now has got more money than they had when Klein came in. And that's in 2 years, you know.
Did you feel very bitter about this, John?
Oh, sure, you know.
You must have done.
Well, I mean, for a long time we didn't know, because of course we were living well with those.
You had all the material.
We seemed to have all the material good, but it was like we got the cake when they got the cash, right? You know, they kept us happy, and just you know, mainly we were working all the time anyway. So what else do we do? Oh, we lived in a nice hotel. So what? The tour was TV in a Rolls Royce, and it was usually on the company or whatever they do that way of doing it.
You know, it's no big news that some artist or some kids in showbiz got robbed, right? It's the same old story. The attitude is, if they have money, they won't work.
Yeah.
That's the old adage in show business. Yeah. If you give the kids money, or the star, or whoever he is, money, he won't work. That's not true. If you give an artist money, he's secure and he can work. And I think we went through a little trauma of divorce because it was scary after being with people for 10 years suddenly to be out on your own. It's so cool saying, I want to leave you to anybody that you've been with for a long time. And then suddenly you're out on your own. It was really, I just got secure in my own work. Because after the sort of demise of the Beatles so-called thing, I was a bit shook up, whether I knew it or not, you know. And of course it affected my work and I was very insecure. And I'd be thinking, maybe Paul wrote everything, or maybe it was all George, you know, and maybe I didn't do anything, and I'd have to, and then I'd look through the list of songs and think, well, I did write that, well, I helped with that, oh, okay, I'm all right, Amy, I'm all right. So then I started doing my own work, and then when I got secure in myself, then I could allow her to work, you know, and so that's how it worked.
Why is what you're doing now not boring when that was?
Because I can change musicians whenever I like. And it tends to get into a format, you know, because we were together much longer than the public knew us. You know, it wasn't just from 64. I was 24 in 64, and I've been playing with Paul since I was 15. And he's very nice. And
you must be pleased with what Paul's doing now, John.
I'm pleased that everybody's doing well, you know. I'm more pleased he's going to be all right.
When Paul was feeling kind, he'd give me a solo, you know, or maybe if he was feeling guilty that he'd had most of the A-sides or something, he'd give me a solo, you know.
That's Paul writing a pop song.
Was there really a Rita, do you know?
Yeah.
A meter?
He makes them up like a novelist. You hear lots of McCartney influence songs going on now on the radio, you know. These stories about boring people being postmen and secretaries and writing whole... I'm not interested in writing third, but I like to write about me.
Right.
Because I know me. I don't know anything about secretaries and postmen, whatever.
I think George produces some beautiful guitar playing, you know. But I think he's too hung up to really let it go. But so is Eric, really, you know. Maybe he's changed. They're also hung up, you know. Well, we all are. That's the problem.
Do you like Ringo's record, his country one?
I think it's a good record. I wouldn't buy any of it, you know. I think it's a good record, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear Boku of Blues, that song, you know. I thought, good, you know, I was glad, and I didn't feel as embarrassed as I did about his first record, you know. But it's hard for you to ask me. It's like asking you, what do I think of... Ask me about other people, you know, because it looks so awful when I say I don't like this and I don't like that. It's just that I wouldn't, you know, I don't like many of the Beatles records either, you know. My own taste is different from that which I've played sometimes, which is called cop-out, you know, to make money or whatever, or because I didn't know any better.
Well, it's like when the lawyers come into the divorce, you know? And that makes it a whole different ballgame, you know? Speak to my lawyer.
But you...
Although we have communicated over the phone in the last year, Paul and I, often.
Yeah, I mean, you've been communicating with each other for longer than that, surely, haven't you? In fact, right through all this. Or was there a time when you weren't talking to each other?
Well, it wasn't that we weren't talking to each other. There was so much going on, we didn't get a chance, you know, and he was up in Campbelltown.
Gardening.
Yeah. He was up there for a long time at one period. Nobody could get in touch with him at all. When people would decide to get a divorce, you know, quite often you decide amicably. But when you get your lawyers and they say don't talk to the other party unless there's a lawyer present, then that's when the drift really starts happening. And then when you can't speak to each other without a lawyer, then there's no communication. And it's really lawyers that make divorces nasty. You know, if there was a nice ceremony like getting married for divorce, it would be much better. Even divorce of business partners, because it wouldn't be so nasty. But it always gets nasty because you're never allowed to speak your own mind. You have to talk in double Dutch. You have to spend all your time with a lawyer, and you get frustrated, and you end up saying and doing things you wouldn't really do under normal circumstances.
Being fat myths. So he rang me up on that day and said, I'm doing what you and Yoko are doing and putting out an album, and I'm leaving the group too, he said. I said, good, you know, I was a little, you know, feeling a little strange because he was saying it this time, you know, although it was a year later. And I said, good, you know, that's it. You know, because he was the one that wanted the Beatles most.
I'm also answering Paul's last album, which most of you, because he didn't hand out a lyric sheet, don't know what he was saying. It starts off with too many people going underground. That was your first mistake. You took your lucky break and broke it in two. Now, if that doesn't mean what it says, I don't know what. Also, the song ends, we believe that we can't be wrong. So I wrote, and since you've gone, you're just another day. I think it's the funniest thing I've ever heard. I don't think that about Paul all my life, or all the time. I wrote it in an immediate response to when I heard his messages a little different. Paul is really, really hurt by it. I'll know by the vibes come round, even if he doesn't call. Well, I'll explain it to him. I'll even write to him, you know, if he really thinks
kidding a little, you know.
Thinks it's really,
now,
really
come
serious.
on, you know, that kind of thing.
But
You're obviously friends again. I mean,
well, we're not fighting too much, but I really never thought we'd be so stupid. But we did.
What, like splitting, like they
like
did,
splitting and arguing, you know, and then they come back and one's in a wheelchair 20 years later, you know, all that. I never thought we'd come to that because I didn't think we were that stupid. But we were naive enough to let people come between us, and that's what happened, you know.
Have the Beatles been the group that made up the Beatles, have you been together at all since 1970?
No, not four. Ringo, Paul and I were in LA together, and George was in England recording. At one period, Paul wasn't allowed in for a bit, and then George had trouble getting in, and I wasn't going to leave, so that just getting the four of us in a room is almost impossible at the moment. You know, now if George goes on tour, I don't know, where's Paul going to be? Is Ringo going to be here? Ringo's here now in August, but will he be here then? Because he's got his family to look after. He's going to go back, so it's like ships that pass in the night.
Relationships are cordial.
Oh, very warm. Very warm, my dear.
All right.
Are they getting together?
Yes, are they getting together?
Well, we'd have to be on Dark Horse label the way things are going. We never talk about it because the four of us have never got into a room together because of green cards and immigration and all that jazz. George and Paul have a little trouble getting in and out of this country too. And so the four of us have never sat in a room together for 3 years. Although we've managed to get three together in one room. That was Paul, Ringo and me. That was sometime in the summer, in the middle of Harry's album, actually.
Would you look forward to just some kind of a fun get-together sometime?
Sure, you know. I think we all would, you know. Well, we keep in contact by phone and letter. Like if I haven't heard from George for a bit, I write to him. And he says, I'm coming. All right, I'll wait for him to come. You know. If I'm in New York and he's in New York, then we'll see each other, but it's a long way, West Coast. I thought, I don't want to go on a flight. What are you doing? Oh, all right, goodbye. And so there's always, you know, if you say no, it's a negative. They all hate each other. If you say yes, it's rolling crawdaddy. Cream says they're getting together, you know, Harry's bringing them together or something. there's always a chance we'd work together because, you know, if we see each other, we tend to fall into that kind of mood. But I can't see us touring or anything like that. We've never discussed it. I could see us making records. You know, why not? But that touring bit, I don't quite fancy that myself.
You mentioned that earlier about things with the Beatles being settled. Has everything been settled, or are there still things?
It's like a big family, you know, and the body of the Beatles died, and there's this sort of will with all these different angles to it that people are trying to sort out. It's like an estate was left and somebody died, and we're the sons that have got to try and sort it out. Nobody knows what they're doing. But I think we're finally coming through with that.
How long was it fun?
Yeah, well, everything's fun off and on, you know. So I suppose it could have gone on being fun off and on, or it could have gone worse, I don't know. It's just that when you grow up, you know, we don't want to be the crazy gang, which they might know over here, which is British, or the Marx Brothers, which is sort of being dragged on stage playing She Loves You when we've got, you know, asthma and tuberculosis, and when we're 50, you know. Here they are again, yesterday, all my troubles. So a long time ago I said that I didn't want to be singing She Loves You when I'm 30. I said that when I was about 25 or something, which in a roundabout way meant that I wouldn't be doing whatever I was doing then, you know, 30. Well, I was 30 last October, and that's about when my life changed, really.
And so therefore I could lift out all this garbage that was still being carried round, which was influencing the way I thought and the way I lived and all the rest of it. And then finally free myself from the mental, let's call it people, or 60s or whatever it was. So the first one was a physical escape. The second one was a mental escape. You know, when are they coming back, and when are they going to do this, and what do you think of Paul, and what do you think of George? You know, I don't think that old gang of mine, you know, that's all over. You know, when I met Yoko is when you meet your first woman, and you leave the guys at the bar, and you don't go play football anymore, and you don't go play snooker or billiards. Maybe some guys like to do it every Friday night or something, and, you know, continue that relationship with the boys. But once I found the woman, the boys became of no interest whatsoever.
The presumption is, A, that the Beatles would get together again, or even thinking about it. B, that if they got together, John and Yoko split, Paul and Linda split, or now that we've left Klein, that the rumor now is that Paul's leaving Eastman. It just has, it's irrelevant. It's non sequitur. It doesn't have anything to do with that decision. And
but the chances of your ever performing as a group again are in no way enhanced by the present situation, are they?
Well, with or without the present situation, the chances are practically nil, although I hate to say definitely anything, because every time I make a definite statement, I change my mind. But I don't have any feeling about it, and I don't think any of the others really do. Because if any of you actually remember when we were together, everybody's talking as if it was wonderful all the time, on all the press and everybody and the people all saying how great and wonderful, but it wasn't like that at all. And imagine if they did get together, what kind of scrutiny they'd be under. Nothing could fit the dream people had of them, so forget it, you know? Yeah. It's just ludicrous, you know?
In the long run, would you consider them happy recollections?
Oh, sure, right. You know, it was a great experience at 24 or 5, whenever it was, to do all that instead of something else. I couldn't think of anything better to do besides be a fisherman. I can't see, there's no reason why we should ever play together. I mean, listen to the music. Would George have ever flourished like that if we carried on with the group? No chance. There was no room. How could...
I thought he was working on a solo album.
Well, I suppose we could have worked together, and... No, he wasn't. He worked on the solo album after the split.
You don't think you would have had the chance to have done
If people need the Beatles so much, all they have to do is to buy each album and make a track out of it, and put it on tape, track by track, one of me, one of Paul, one of George, one of Ringo, if they really need it that much, because otherwise the music is just the same, only on separate albums. Instead of having the White Album or Abbey Road, where I sing a song, George sings a song, Paul sings a song, Ringo sings a song, one, like that, we make an album each. That's the only difference, and it's far better music, because we're not suppressed. In the Beatles, by the time the Beatles were at their peak, we were cutting each other down to size. We were limiting our capacity to write and perform by having to fit it into some kind of format. And that's why it caused trouble, you know.
But you don't again, you know, it's the thing that...
Well, I couldn't say no categorically on the Bible and on grapefruit, I swear. I get grapefruit in. I swear we'd never play it again under any circumstances whatsoever. I've no idea. But personally, I don't see any reason to form that group again. Paul has his new band. I have a new band. No doubt George will have a band and Ringo will have a band. I mean, for me personally, when you listen to the Stones music, nothing's ever happened. It's the same old stuff goes on and on and on forever. I've never heard anything different from them. So I think it'd be a good scene if they broke up and made some individual music, because it's the same old rehash of the same stuff over and over again.
It's like I no longer believe in myth, you know, and Beatles is another myth, you know. I don't believe in it. The dream's over. You know, and I'm not just talking about the Beatles is over, I'm talking about the generation thing. You know, the dream's over, like, it's over, you know, and we gotta, well, I have, anyway, personally, gotta get down to so-called reality.
Do you miss it?
No, I don't miss it. You know, I've done it. That's enough. I'd have hated to wait all my life till I was 50, you know, to make it, as they say. We're more liable to be inclined to work together in 76 when the contract comes up. I mean, to be very commercial about it. I mean, we'd be stupid to give away anything new that we get paid now. I don't know why the hell we'd do it, but it's possible.
Would you like that to happen?
If it happens, I'll enjoy it.
Would you want to initiate that happening?
Well, I couldn't say.
If you could, I mean, is it something you would like to see yourself doing?
If I could. I don't know, Ellie, because you know me. I'll go on you again, you know.
In spite of all the things, the Beatles really could play music together when they weren't uptight. And if I get a thing going, Ringo knows where to go, you know, like that. And he does what? We've played together so long that it fits, you know. I mean, that's the only thing I sometimes miss is being able to just sort of blink or make a certain noise, and I know they'll all know where we're going on an ad-lib thing. But I don't miss it that much, you know.
Got to a position where each one of us have wanted to do it at the same time. I think over the period of being apart, we've all thought, oh, that wouldn't be nice. That wouldn't be bad, you know. I mean, I've worked with Ringo and George. I haven't worked with Paul because we had a more difficult time, but now we're pretty close, you know.
And there's no hard feelings to any member of the group or anything?
No, nobody in particular. No. Yeah, I think it's quite possible because there'd be no reason not to. And now whether we do live performances is another matter. That's a whole ball game. But it's quite feasible that we'd make records together. Because I've worked with Ringo. I've worked with Ringo and George. The only one I haven't worked with since the breakup is Paul. And I've worked with Elton John, I've worked with Harry Nilsson, we all work with lots of other artists, so why not each other? It's quite possible. And the other question is, would it be worth it? You know, but I jammed with Paul. I did actually play with Paul, yeah. We did a lot of stuff in LA. But there was 50 other people playing too, and they're all just watching me and Paul, you know. Well, some DJ said last night they played some Beatles stuff on the radio, and I just was going across the dial, and then suddenly I heard something or other. Green Onion, Glass Onion. See, I don't even know my own song. So I listened to it because it was a rare track. They don't usually play it. They usually play the same 10 when they say there's going to be a Beatle weekend, you know, the same 10, Hard Day's Night, Help, Yesterday, Something, Let It Be, you know, there's all that wealth of material, but we only ever hear 10 songs. Mm-hmm. And he said, I want to thank John, Paul, George and Ringo for not getting back together again and spoiling the good thing. So I thought that was the sign of the times, you know, that people are catching on now. Because having been in that sort of pop business so long and tried to retain myself throughout it, but obviously not always being successful at that, it was most uncomfortable when I didn't feel I was being myself. You know, when I would have to smile when I didn't want to smile. And it became like all that, like being a politician, you know. And after 10 or 15, almost 20 years of being under contract and having to produce two albums a year in the early days and a single every 3 months, regardless of what the hell else you were doing, or what your family life was like, what your personal life was like, nothing counted. You just had to get those songs out. Now, Paul and I turned out a lot of songs those days, and it was easier because it was the beginning of a relationship and career. Paul and I developed in public, as it were. We had a little rehearsal in private, but mainly we developed our abilities in public. But then it got to be format and sort of not the pleasure that it was, and that's when I felt that I'd lost myself. Not that I was on purposely being a hypocrite or a phony, but it took something away from what I set out to do. I started out to do rock and roll because I absolutely liked doing it. But you see, having gone through the Beatlemania thing, nowadays it's nothing like that. I mean, I can walk down the street and somebody just say, "Oh, hi, John," and they usually say, "How's your immigration?" You know, if it's in New York, right? And they don't hassle me. I might sign one autograph, two anywhere. And so now it's like heaven. I can go and eat. We go and eat. We go to the movies. We go wherever we want. If there's an announcement, like there's an opening and everybody's going to be there, you get a lot of noise and cameras and flashbulbs. But if we just decide to go to dinner, it's cool, you know? And what I really got through this 5 years was I'm not running for office. I like to be liked. I don't like to offend people. I would like to be a happy, contented person. I don't want to have to sell my soul again, as it were, to have a hit record. I've discovered that I can live without it, and it makes it happier for me. But I'm not going to come back in and try and create a persona who would not be myself. I reckon now if I went out, not as the Beatles, but just Yoko and I went out with the group, then people wouldn't be screaming, you know, and because our records are better now, I think, and more mature, and I think the audience will be more mature too. That's what I'm hoping. I don't want any of that jazz, you know.
You've said somewhere you said you'd like to be forgotten, but now you say you'd like to go out and perform again, so you can't really have
well, I can still be forgotten when I'm dead. I don't really care what happens when I'm dead, if that's what you mean.
Routine.
Well, you get the big prize when you get cancer and you've been drawing circles.
And then die,
for 20
right.
years. And then the biggest one is when you die, but they give you a pretty big one for dying in public. Okay, so those are the things that we're not interested in.
Is that true? Please take this letter seriously, because I would very much prefer you to be alive then.